Welcome to the Powerhouse Project, a podcast empowering and celebrating women. I'm your host, Lisa Larone. On the podcast today, we have Victoria LaBillois. Victoria is a Mi'kmaq entrepreneur and the owner and president of Wejipeg Excavation and co-owner and president of Wejuseg Construction. She is also the vice chair of the National Indigenous Economic Development Board and a two-time winner of the top 100 most powerful women in Canada. Welcome to the Powerhouse Project, Victoria. I'm in awe of your accomplishments. There's so much I want to discuss with you, so let's start with the obvious. How did you not only get involved in the construction industry, but become an owner of both an excavation and a construction company?
So let me begin by saying thank you, Lisa. I'm so happy to be part of this podcast series. How did I become involved in construction? A very nonlinear path. I call myself a serial entrepreneur, and my first business actually was selling T-shirts on the Powwow Trail, and then I learned a thing or two about business over the years, and that progressed into passive income, buying my first apartment building. I sold purses during the evening. I was always looking for opportunities, and wind energy came to our traditional territory in a big way in Gaspésie. I managed to get on a job site one day in Carleton, Quebec, just a few miles down the road. And I did a SWOT analysis of what was happening in this industry. So I should say that I did work for the Indigenous Public Service for a number of years and sat at many tables where we talked about economic development, we talked about entrepreneurship for our people, but seemed to be spinning in circles. So when I saw this new industry come to our territory, I said, well, this is where we're going to get in on the ground floor. Our community was already involved in MET testing, wind energy. They had installed towers. So they were looking at this as a viable industry to get involved in. And when I went on this job site, I just spent a day there and looked at everything that was involved, from the trenching that was happening, the dust suppression, of course, all of the excavation, the grubbing, the cement, just everything. And the low-hanging fruit for me was excavation. And I have to admit, knew nothing about it, but wrote myself a little Post-it note and put it on my vision board back in 2009. I'm going to start an excavation contracting company. So that's how I got into Wejipeg Excavation. And I started by leasing my equipment. As you know, heavy equipment, very expensive. So I cut my teeth by leasing. My first year, I had a 34-ton excavator, I had a rock truck, and I had a loader. And, learning about maintenance, learning fuel expenses, float cost, and operating. So as the years progressed, I was looking at a growth strategy that involved acquiring my own equipment, what was more feasible. So I did that for about 5-6 years, and then started running into some barriers, of course, along the way, and inability to access or to secure bonds to be able to bid on bigger projects. So I was just this little minor player on a number of wind park construction sites across the Gaspésie. So I secured a partner. And at first, we were just putting in one-off bids. We didn't create a formal joint venture. And we were never successful, but we were learning each time along the way. And I think building that relationship where we could trust each other. And finally, after I think maybe 2 years, we formed Wejuseg Construction. So that's how the heavy civil took off and helped to bring Mi'kmaq trained, skilled resources to projects across our traditional territory with that company.
So how did you, even to lease your first piece of equipment, did you have savings built up in order to start this business, or?
Yeah, good question. I didn't have a rich uncle to call upon. So I was still working. I was working full time up until then, and had put together a little nest egg. And this is so funny. I remember putting opening up the bank account. You're setting up the company, and I was incorporating and doing all those steps on my own. And I remember I went and put $1,000 in my Wejipeg bank account, and just so proud of that. I think I wrote one check and there it's gone.
One.
And
Yep.
and that was just to cover my initial license, my Régie de Bâtiment du Québec license.
Oh
Now I
my
have
God.
no cash flow already. So yeah, there was some very lean years in the beginning, and I told you I had no experience in this industry. I learned very quickly that, I mean, it's 90 days to get paid, which
Yeah.
is more 120 days. So in the first year of operation, I put my first piece of equipment on the ground on April 26, 2011. Momentous day. I won't forget it. And I think we got out of the red by October of that year. So I was leaning heavily on my personal lines of credit, my
Yeah.
personal savings, trying to build this in. And when I say it, lines of credit, it was like taking from robbing Peter to pay Paul over here, and
Yeah.
waiting to get paid and chasing that down. And I was chief cook and bottle washer in the early days, just doing the accounting and troubleshooting and running parts up to the machinery. It was fun. It was
Now,
fun.
now, did you have a crew that you worked with, or?
So what I did is when I leased the equipment, I would secure operators from the
Okay.
community to
Yeah.
work on the equipment. So a very skeletal crew in the beginning.
That's amazing. And so have you grown obviously from there to where, can you say how big you are now, or?
With the with Wejuseg Construction, our largest project, we had over 22 employees, and that was a source of pride. Now, I have
Yeah.
to say that when I originally built these companies, it was to work outside of the reserve.
Mhm.
There are little excavation and contracting companies that exist in the community. What I was eyeing was all of the economic activity that was happening across our traditional territory, and yet continued to exclude our people. So it was very intentional when I designed Wejipeg Excavation and Wejuseg was to work off reserve. I didn't start accepting work in community until, of course, COVID hit, and I thought that was the end of us, right? Because
Right.
the
Yeah.
shit shut right down. But it turns out it saved our skin back in 2020. We had an installation project. We were installing water and sewer on this road in our community. It was a dirt road, Capeland Road. And here's the irony: that road, I used to pick bottles on it when I was a kid. And fast forward, I'm not going to say how many years later, many years later, we're running a project,
That's awesome.
employing our people and seeing the quality and the talent of our skilled trades, men and women,
Yeah.
working in community for the betterment of our community. It was a very proud moment for us.
All right, well, that's awesome. What's been one of the more challenging situations you've encountered, and how did you overcome it?
The challenging situations, I have to go back to the money. Money
Yeah.
is very tight, and looking to even lease heavy equipment is quite costly and very impactful on your cash flow. It just burns right through. So I was looking to purchase equipment, and I had a strategy over the years how we would build with Wejibek. I encountered a major barrier. I had my first piece of equipment I purchased was the I bought a used excavator in 2012, and that I called the excavator my money maker because it was always working. And then I needed a loader. So what happened is I had secured my first year-round contract, and I was so proud, a winter contract, because when winter hits Gaspésie here, I'm talking like 12 feet of snow.
Yeah.
Nobody's working. So I had this winter contract, a 12-month contract, and I needed a loader. I call up my equipment dealer, who by then I had fostered a very positive working relationship. And based on my word, they sent the loader out. I said, listen, I said, I'll get the financing. It'll catch up with you really quick. I sent him a $10,000 deposit. I said, this will go fast. So I approached my bank, the bank of the day that I was dealing with, that I had already had my loan for my excavator. I had a mortgage there for an apartment building that I had purchased 10 years prior. I had a very positive working relationship with this bank. And they reassured me that they had this new loan system in place, that I was going to be so impressed how quickly the money's going to come about. Long story short, my machine starts working up there. There's no loan yet, so I got to make a lease payment. These payments are double what you'd pay for
Yeah.
for a loan. So that happens. I'm calling the bank. No movement, no news. A couple of months go by. Finally, I show up at the bank. Like, listen, I just burnt through my working capital here on making these lease payments. I need to secure the financing for this machine. And they sat me down, and this is a bank I've dealt with 20 years. And they said, well, Toronto says we can't lend you the money because you're status Indian living on reserve. And I'm like, you know what, Lisa? I thought I was being punked. I literally looked around the room. Is there a camera? Is this what?
Yeah.
I'm like, I've been with you for like 20 plus years. I have mortgage. I have countless accounts. I've purchased equipment. I asked, have I ever missed a payment? No. Have I ever been late? No. I have great credit. I have a business plan. I have a contract in hand.
Yeah.
And you're telling me because who I am and where I live, now you're not lending me money? Did somebody make a mistake on those previous loans? Like, really? Like,
Yeah.
and this woman is squirming. I felt for her, but I'm like, what's going on here? So I asked them to put this in writing to me because, again, I was in disbelief.
Yeah.
And I've got this equipment working for me. So I went out and I secured funding from two other bodies. One of them was the IFI, and then another was a leasing company. And I played them off against each other to get a better interest rate and took the lowest interest rate. After I let that sit with me, what the bank had told me, it left a very bad taste in my mouth. But you know what? I'm running a business here. And you know what the day to day is like. I get caught up in this. So after a couple of months, after my down season in the winter time, I said, I can't just sit on this. I need to speak up. I need to speak out. So I challenged the bank and I launched a human rights complaint. And it took another maybe 5-6 months to get the hearing. It was held across the river in Camelton. So they bring in their big VP from Halifax and their lawyer. And I show up with my support person who had human rights degree, by the way. So we show up at this meeting and dressed to the nines, and I've got all my files lined up and I'm ready. And I spoke for a good 6 hours. I'm telling you,
Wow.
It was pent up. And I'll tell you what I was thinking about. Not me, because I had found other financing for this.
Yeah.
But I also serve as a mentor and a coach to many other young people in business. And I'm thinking about these young people. You go to a bank, you've got a great idea, and you're going to go forward. And all of a sudden, because where you live and who you are, they're not going to lend you money. What about the 4 C's of credit? Didn't you look at my character or my capacity? No, you looked at, I'm First Nation and I live on reserve.
That's
I'm not
shocking.
changing either of those for you.
Yeah. And nor should
That's
you.
where I come from. So that's about as much as I could tell, other than I was very happy with the outcome of how that went. And I don't think that bank is going to forget anytime soon, because I gave them quite a lengthy history lesson on the decimating effects of colonialism on our traditional economies, how we were excluded from the emerging economies, how we're in an economic renaissance. At that time, we weren't talking about reconciliation yet, but I said, we are rebuilding our economies and we're doing it with or without your help. You are going to know who we are. We're here.
Which is awesome. So in 2022, the National Indigenous Economic Board launched the National Indigenous Economic Strategy for Canada. And can you talk about why we need to talk about economic reconciliation for Canada's Indigenous people?
Absolutely. And it's necessary to provide that context because people will ask that question, well, why do we need economic
Yeah,
reconciliation to begin with? And it's almost placing the blame of where we are squarely on the shoulders of the indigenous people of these territories, right? So it's a lesson in looking at what happened to our traditional economies. We were thriving, we lived in abundance, we had very well established trade routes, we had alliances. For our part, the Mi'kmaq, we were part of the Wabanaki Confederacy, along with the Listugui, Abenaki, Penobscot, and impacts of residential schools, day schools, introduction of sickness, of alcohol. So not only were our traditional economies decimated, but the economies that emerged benefiting from the natural resources across our traditional territories deliberately excluded us from participating in the economy. And
yeah,
then we're relegated to these swamps that they call reserves. And here we are, here we find ourselves. So that's why we need economic reconciliation. It's it's in the face of all of these legislative and systemic barriers that continue to exist and impede us as we try and move forward. And the example I used of the bank telling me they can't lend me money, somebody making a decision from Toronto impacting my life here in little old Listugui,
yeah.
based on the color of my skin and where I'm living, those are barriers. That's real barriers we need to address.
I agree. Now, do you think Canada is doing enough for truth and reconciliation?
I think Canada is trying,
Yeah,
and we're going to stumble, we're going to make mistakes. So we can't fault anybody for trying, but
yeah,
we need to learn from these mistakes. And we have to have these difficult conversations, this reckoning that has to happen, that talking about the truth. What are the
yeah,
ugly truths that form our reality right now before we can get to reconciling this relationship that we had as nations and nation to nation building. And you look across the landscape, the Indigenous economic landscape, there are no two communities or nations that are at the same place.
yeah,
Some of the communities are more progressive and advanced in where they're at, and some
yeah.
are just starting because we're tackling such a plethora of issues all at the same time. How much energy and resources and capacity do we have to put into economic reconciliation? First, we've got to put roofs over people's heads, look at the housing crisis that exists, the water crisis,
Yeah.
access to fresh water.
Yeah.
So
Now, the Indigenous population is actually one of the fastest growing populations in Canada. So, why do you think that we're not engaging more in the construction industry? That we have more Indigenous workers? Do you think or do you think that there's equitable access to jobs?
I'm going to speak in two parts to this. One at like the macro level, and then I'm going to share a good news story with you at the micro level. So obviously, this is what keeps me up at night, right? Trying to find talent to work within our organizations, and we have such a big demand for engineers. I would love for my company to employ a Mi'kmaq engineer, but I mean the demand is so high for these types of skills. So if we back up a little bit and look, where are we at with funding for on reserve schools? Where are we at with promoting STEM and careers in STEM, in science,
Yeah,
technology, engineering, and math? Where are we? We are lagging behind in these areas. So by time our students do finish their high school education, do they have the strength and the background in STEM to pursue careers in engineering? And I'm using that as an example.
yeah,
And of course, post secondary is not for everybody. So
yeah,
there are opportunities for our youth to study in skilled trades, but they need to know about these trades, that they
yeah,
exist, and that there are jobs that exist within these fields of study. So I'll use the example, we're talking construction for glaziers. Do they know what it takes to install glass and windows? as an example of a trade,
Yeah.
or millwrights. What does a
Yeah.
millwright do? So if you don't have these types of trades that exist in your community, you don't
Yeah.
have the role modeling or the understanding of this as a career. So we need to start very young with our kids in elementary school about having these job fairs and teaching them of all, because we have such a great demand for all of the trades in our
Yeah.
community. Not just the residential housing that's happening, but if you look at heavy civil construction, what we need pipe fitters in building the wind parks. We need wind park technicians and millwrights. We need heavy equipment operators all the time. And these aren't trades that are just reserved for the young men in our community, because I see young women enrolling in
Yeah.
these trades as well. And that is so encouraging, but we don't see enough enrolling. So that's the piece. We need a focus on education starting in elementary school,
Yeah.
and making sure that our on reserve schools are funded equally to provincial schools, so that we can
Yeah.
invest the resources in STEM, and we have the talent. We just need to
Yeah.
nurture the talent. So I
I,
said
and
I
I,
would share
sorry, go ahead.
a good news story for you
Yeah.
about skilled trades. Back in the early 2010s, our community, Listugui, had partnered with our sister communities, Geskabegia and Gespeg, and they were building their own wind park. So it was a wind park called Meski Ukjuzun. So we knew construction, we had a long runway, was going to start like in 2014. So the tribal council had secured project funding through strategic partnership initiatives, and brought in like $1.1 million to train up the women and men of our three Mi'kmaq communities to work in the skilled trades that are required for building a wind park. So that's where we trained a number of people, studied to be electricians,
Wow.
millwrights, heavy equipment operators, all of the skilled trades that we were going to need. And our men and women enrolled in this. So that was a big success story. And the size of a workforce when you're building a wind park,
Yeah.
because of the size of because of the harshness of our winter, we had two construction seasons running from spring to fall, and it was driven by weather, right? So
Yeah.
over two construction seasons, we had a workforce of about 300 each season. And of that workforce, we had 111 skilled and trained Mi'kmaq tradespeople.
Wow.
And I think that's phenomenal.
That's
I tell
awesome.
that story all the time. And that was the vision and foresight of our leadership,
Yeah.
training our people for jobs that were going to exist down the line.
And you can take that trade anywhere. And I think that's the important part.
Portable skills, that's
Yeah.
right. And you know what? You can take that trade and you can also start a company.
Yep. I do a lot of talking because we feel the same way. I'm the president of the Canadian Women in Construction, and we're trying to get more women into the industry. And actually, we're doing a pretty good job of attracting women to the industry. The problem that we're having, obviously, is retaining them just because of the harassment and discrimination. So, we're trying to make strides there. But one of the things we did recognize was you have to start talking to the kids when they're in elementary school. By the time they've reached high school, they've already made up their mind of the direction that they're going to go, and it's basically too late. So I think that that's really what we're all trying to do. So I wanted to congratulate you on winning an Indspire award, and I was hoping that maybe you would spend a few minutes to say what that means to you, but also to explain what Indspire is all about.
Well, thank you for that. It's very humbling. An Inspire Award is the highest honor given in Canada by your peers in recognition, and it's across several categories. So I was awarded the Inspire Award this year for business and commerce. And when I got the call, it was a Sunday afternoon. I was busy cooking supper and multitasking, phone rings, and I when I saw the number, I thought it was an emergency job. I said, "Oh,
Yeah.
something's happened. There was a break in a water line or something like that." And no, it was Inspire calling to tell me I won. And I just went silent, and I was quiet. And they asked, "Do you know what an Inspire Award is? Are you familiar with it?" I'm like, "Yeah." I said, I hold that in very high regard. And
Yeah.
I said, I'm just a little shell shocked right here. And of course, uh, by virtue of my role with the National Indigenous Economic Development Board, I get to meet with amazing people working in the Indigenous economic landscape. We get to travel to different communities and hear their success stories, their challenges. So my immediate thought was, I know so many deserving people
Yeah,
who should win this award, and you're giving it to me. So
that's awesome.
very, very humbled by this. Very grateful. Just gratitude, of course, to be recognized by my peers for this. But I have to share a story with you, Lisa. I know we're a little pressed for time here. You were mentioning how we go about increasing women in construction trade.
Yeah.
So I got this funny story. It was about 5 or 6 years back. I was invited to speak on an Indigenous women's panel. It was part of the G7 when Canada was hosting these discussions. And Dr. Marie Delorme was facilitating this panel and had assembled uh, this panel of amazing Indigenous women. So I fielded a question, and they asked me if there are a lot of Indigenous women working in this space. And so I said, I was very privileged to meet other Indigenous women who run their own construction companies, two others in Quebec, one James Bay Cree and one Algonquin woman. And so I said, I was so happy to find other Indigenous women in this space. But I said, I'm very happy to hire women heavy equipment operators because I know I'm not going to worry about them trying to pop a wheelie with a piece of heavy equipment that costs $250,000,
Yeah.
right? Testosterone, and they're not going to try and test this to the limits. And I
Yeah.
get a bunch of big eyes in the audience. The one man in the room was the AV guy in the back doing sound.
Yeah.
He burst out laughing, and then he caught himself, and I was laughing in the back. I said, I am serious when I say this. So just wanted to share that with you. I know you can relate.
I definitely can relate. I can definitely relate. So looking back, did you ever think that you'd be labeled a change maker?
No, 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 no. If I thought I was going to get a label, it would be she who kicks indoors. And it was by virtue of again sitting at many tables with many
Yeah.
chiefs and council and our leadership, and just banging our heads against the wall here, trying to affect positive change, and just not seeing that change happening. To say, you know what, we're not asking for the moon here. We're asking for our fair share to
Yeah.
access and to be part of the regional economy that is benefiting across our traditional territory. So I think that's what I set out to do, to be called a change maker. I've been called far worse.
So have I. I like change maker. I think that's awesome.
I could handle change maker.
Yeah, me too. So we like to end each episode is if you could go back in time, what advice would you give your younger self?
Just do it. I didn't start my companies until later, but
Now,
I
did you have help and
always had an
support?
interest. I had tremendous support, I have to say, from my husband, who is my biggest cheerleader, Ken, to my family, to every business that I've tried to support, tried to launch, that they have been supportive, and through just positive messaging that you can do this and you're going to make this happen, and yes, and just being there, and of course my community and the leadership and the people, the employees. That's the best part of the job,
Yeah.
is I get to call someone in the community and say, hey, I got this job starting, are you available for work? And they're like, yes, when do I
Yeah.
start? And that's the best part, and it's very rewarding. So I get tremendous support from my husband, my family, my community. Yeah.
And I think we talk a lot about that as being women in a traditionally male dominated industry, that we really do need the support of allies, and we do need to find our community. And I think it's really important that, we celebrate each other and we support one another, because I don't think that we do that enough. So Victoria, your journey exemplifies resilience, determination, and positive impact. please continue to share your stories, and let's continue to raise up our women, break down these barriers that we face, and continue to talk about economic reconciliation and economic prosperity. Thank you so much for joining us on the Powerhouse Project.
Thank you.
Find more information about our guests and more at thepowerhouse-project.com, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.